Keep Off, A New Way to Handle Coral Reef Destruction by Ben Reichenbach. Coral reefs across the Indo-Pacific have exceptionally high rates of biodiversity and supports an estimated 138 million people's livelihood. As such, the destruction of an area that supports so much life, both financially and ecologically, is something that needs to be handled. To date, many attempts have been made to try and effectively slow or stop the destruction of the reef with policy that we will examine later. However, the increasingly destructive effects of human behavior, both directly and indirectly, call for more action to be taken. Over the span of the entire world, 10% of the coral reefs have been destroyed, but in the Philippines this number is astonishingly higher, with a 70% destruction rate. Clearly something about this area has caused an increase in reef destruction or coral bleaching. The Jason Education Project at Texas A&M publishes and upkeeps a website known as Ocean World that publishes valuable information for students and teachers about the importance of different ocean habitats. One of these articles aimed towards informing the students is called Coral Reef Destruction and Conservation and is a short overview of coral bleaching and its causes. Humans affect the reef on a global and local scale. The rising water temperatures due to global warming have been adding to the destruction of coral on a global level. Coral destruction is most easily recognizable as coral bleaching, which is a decoloration caused by the death of the algae living inside of the coral. The rising water temperatures is not conducive to the type of algae that lives inside the coral, but is supportive to other algae that overgrows near the surface and blocks sunlight from the coral. Humans are directly affecting the reef too. Many divers and fishermen sell fish to restaurants and pet stores and do not care about the safety of the reef, the fish, or the other people around. Documented cases in the Philippines of fishermen using dynamite or even cyanide to catch or debilitate the fish can be found. Looking at the massively high rate of coral destruction in the Indo-Pacific Ocean as compared to the rest of the world, combined with the reports of destructive behavior in the same area, suggests that this area is at an elevated risk of total destruction. It also seems apparent that direct human interaction with the reef in this area has rapidly accelerated the bleaching process, costing us large amounts of an incredibly valuable ecosystem. The Department of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Forestry, headed by the Honorable Senator Joe Ludwig, a member of the Democratic Socialist Australian Labor Party, needs to be aware how current research might suggest a policy change. Stricter limitations of human access to high and medium risk areas of the coral reef will prevent further destruction of this irreplaceable ecosystem by eliminating tourist interactions with minimal effects on rates, decreasing the likelihood of dangerous fishing techniques or overfishing of endangered areas, and by cooperating with and enhancing existing policies surrounding the conservation of coral reef. The definition of medium and high-risk areas is a subject that could be interpreted a number of ways. The main causes of coral bleaching are the warming of the water and high acidity. Two studies coming out of academic institutes in Australia help to define where these areas might be. The first is an observation of coral bleaching and the way management should proceed, while the other observes population connectivity in the coral triangle. The ocean surface absorbs 25% of the carbon dioxide added to the atmosphere by human activities. Few policies exist regarding strategies of acidification outside of local stressor regulations, but an approach with consideration to spatial risk spreading, maximum connectivity between reefs, and local scale stressors could minimize further bleaching events. Due to a global push for bioregionalization of coastal and marine areas, a finer regionalization of distinct sub-areas has been developed to more appropriately regulate the reef. Management policies combine species life cycle and ocean currents to create connectivity matrices for populations that provide an ecological view of connectivity. With 95% of coral reefs at medium or higher threat, the restriction of these areas from human contact creates a large area of limited access. A study regarding currents and species type and life stages creates a spatially explicit and network-based approach that uniquely identifies the location and the strength of multi-species connectivity hotspots, dispersal barriers, and dispersal corridors that can be used to create a map of designated endangered areas as medium or high risk. A broad observation of fish and invertebrate taxa reveals distinct barriers over different sections of the reef, and these boundaries could be thusly used to designate legal boundaries as well. It seems that direct human interaction is a large source of the destruction of the reef, and that limiting the access to the reef would drastically decrease destruction. However, limiting access to the reef would hurt the economy. Or would it? In a paper discussing the influence of hurricane risk on tourist destinations, specialists from marine science and economics collaborated in a social experiment to discover what affects tourist decisions of location. It was found that coastal destinations are dependent on tourism and international travel for economic success. However, Australia's economy, while heavily linked to tourism, is not solely dependent upon its success for economic growth. Furthermore, the tourist sector is not totally reliant on coastal attractions to remain successful and supplement the economy. In the Caribbean, an area almost solely dependent on the coastal attractions such as the reef, at least 80% of people surveyed claimed that they would be unwilling to return to a location for the same cost if coral bleaching had occurred. Additionally, it was found that clear weather and beach access were the strongest influence in choice of destination, even over access to other water-related activities and natural surroundings. Looking at the severe destruction to tourism bleaching causes alongside the lack of decreased tourism caused by limited reef access creates a picture that demonstrates the importance of reef conservation to tourists. Alongside the lack of devastation to economic prosperity that would come along with large decreases in tourism, the likely small decrease in tourism resulting from stricter reef access would have a negligible effect on the economy. This new restriction will decrease issues of dangerous fishing and overfishing. As previously discussed, many fishermen use dangerous techniques in an attempt to capture fish. These techniques are obviously harmful to the reef due to immediate damage, but irresponsible fishing can result in dangerously low individual counts for species in a given area. This then not only damages the habitat, but can also disrupt the food chain and unbalance the ecological equilibrium in a way that permanently sways the population and leaves the area overgrown with pest species. The lack of willingness to give up the profession of fishing creates an environment that encourages these overfishing situations, while competition create a necessity for harmful fishing measures. In an observation of artisanal fisheries performed in smaller African locations, provided a view of the mentality that this lifestyle produces. Performed by a group of scientists that have expertise in international development, marine wildlife conservation, coral reef studies, and computational ecology, this group set out to demonstrate how artisan fishermen feel about leaving their livelihood. Many global fisheries suffer from an overfishing that endangers long-term sustainability, and many fishermen are reluctant to abandon their trade. Fishing is one of the oldest professions and is often seen as a family affair or even legacy continuing from fathers to sons. Convincing any person to give something up that they might consider their birthright is bound to be difficult, but the long-term sustainability of the reef and continuing prosperity of the fishermen is vastly aided by the decreased access to reef areas. The addition of economic stressors like sunk capital investments and large opportunity costs of changing professions due to low demand for labor can increase the willingness of fishermen to persist, especially in poorer regions. The Australian coast is not as labor-driven as places like Madagascar, and this has two major implications. First, that the cost of finding a new profession is lower than in some areas of the studied places, and second, that the tenacity of the fishers when regarding remaining in the profession will be less, but can still be modeled in the same way. Under half of the fishermen studied reported that they would stop fishing with a hypothetical 50% reduction in catch. This means that even if the total population of fish was decreased by over half, assuming that some would leave before the 50% reduced catch rate, the majority of fishermen would continue to fish. If continuing after this point, overfishing becomes rampant and the ecosystem is quickly destroyed. Due to the already deteriorating condition of the reef, allowing conditions to continue even to a small portion of decreased populations could drive removal of species and unbalancing of ecosystems in the area, and this could ruin long-term sustainability of the reef. Conservation planning has had potentially controversial productive effects, and there is a lack of fact-based information that regards the effectiveness of conservation policies. Furthermore, there is a litany of policy that already exists and a large amount of money already being spent, $6 to $8 million on the Great Barrier Reef alone. So it would be wiser to continue by supplementing existing policy rather than trying to change the means of conservation. In this observation of the effectiveness of conservation by a collection of Australian and American scientists, existing policy is scrutinized by the response of physical and social capital. Short-term results to policy have been found to be positive on the reef and between managers, and that greater public awareness and education were necessary for integrating biodiversity into the policy. Of the responses to existing policies, only a quarter or less have noted positive outcomes regarding persistence of biodiversity or reduction of threats. One of the most notable recent policies in the Coral Triangle Initiative, which calls for the improvement of marine ecosystem health by balancing objectives of biodiversity in marine protected areas. It seems clear that most policy has the central idea of limiting human access to the reef, but that these policies have been less effective than they should be. These policies also seem sound and logical basis. They are often just implemented incorrectly. Increasing the limitations of what regions are accessible to people will not only increase the range of protection, but will also increase the required participation by area managers. With increased limitations, these low responses to policies would be increased or eliminated. It is clear that the reef is in imminent danger and must be protected before more damage can be done, especially in the Indo-Pacific Ocean regions. By using biodiversity, levels of bleaching, and endangerment of future bleaching to distinguish small local regions of coral that are at a medium or high risk, we can properly stop or reverse some of the damage done to ensure long-term sustainability. The existing policy will be sufficient with increased limitations upon areas that can be accessed, and even with increased restrictions, the economy will not suffer as much as might be conventionally suspected.